Hey, good afternoon, guys. Meteorologist John Hominack here with Empire Weather. Just a quick energy weather video update. Won't keep you too long this afternoon. Just want to go through the pattern and kind of break down exactly what we are seeing here. So obviously we have a colder transition ongoing. Here's the pattern as it stands today, and it's been quite warm. We've had this Pacific jet dumping these troughs into the western U.S., and that's allowed mild air to enter the country. If we look at this from a temperature perspective, you can see just how mild it has been pretty much across the whole central and eastern United States. But the pattern is changing, and as we move forward, what we see is that active Pacific jet begins to pull back. So your jet now is amplifying this way instead of coming all the way down this way. And that'll allow ridging to form here in the western coast of the U.S. and build northward into Alaska. So initially, not the coldest pattern because of how warm it has been across areas like Canada and parts of the northern United States. So your temperature profile is going to look something like this, with cold building in the Rockies and sort of this milder air hanging out. But gradually, the pattern becomes more amplified. And if we watch how this goes, by the time we get past the 25th of January, all of a sudden, you have almost a cross-polar flow coming down here into the United States. And so we're looking at a colder pattern, and the temperature profile generally reflects that. It gets colder in the southern plains behind a storm system that forms during the early part of next week. The high pressure dips in behind it, and we see cooler temperatures as this storm goes off into the eastern United States. And we also see colder air coming down through Canada as well. And this is a pretty straightforward sort of changing pattern at that time. But I want you guys to keep your eye on something in terms of the longevity of this. So we know it's getting colder, and we know our heating demand is going to trend higher than normal as we move into the last stretch here of January and then early February. But initially, we have our ridging centered right here. That's on the western coast of North America. Here's your ridge, right? So just keep your eyes here. Watch what happens to this ridge as we move into early February, because this ridge is retrograding. And by the time we get into early February, our ridge went from here to here. And so this is a very important distinction. If we back up to look at this from a hemispheric view, now our wave pattern looks like this. The air comes over the top here and drops down into the western U.S., and that allows some room for this southeast ridge to begin to form. This wave pattern overall tends to want to put the cold here in the western and north central United States, as opposed to the cold coming down here into the central and eastern U.S. So obviously this favors a demand profile that initially would look above normal. But if you have warmth building into Texas and building into the southeast, you could have a modulated demand profile where we're looking at closer to normal temperatures as a result of that, with your cold generally in the western and north central United States. The one caveat to this is going to be what happens in the Atlantic, because if you do have a very amplified ridge in this region, and we do get some negative NAO or blocking here, then your trough over the northeast would push this southeast ridge down, right? So your profile, and you can kind of see a little hint of it here on the European, your profile might keep this southeast ridge further down and allow your cold to take over some key demand regions in the west, in the north central, and in the northeast. And that is a key distinction. Now, what happens up here in the high latitudes of the Atlantic is going to be extremely intricate. And one of the things we've heard a lot of recently is, are we going to get a sudden stratospheric warming event? The stratospheric polar vortex exists at very upper levels of the atmosphere. What we're looking at here, this chart, this is all the troposphere. This is not the stratosphere. The troposphere is where we experience a lot of our weather. But if the stratospheric vortex does break up, eventually those waves make their way down here into the troposphere. And that allows typically for high latitude blocking to build closer to the poles. If you disrupt that stratospheric polar vortex, it disperses the cold elsewhere as opposed to having it centered up here. Here's the current state of the stratospheric polar vortex. This black line right here is showing you it. As you can see, it's heading towards almost record strength here as we get towards the 25th of January, and then it's falling off a cliff. Going below this blue line is average, and then heading towards into the 30th or 20th percentile of strength of the zonal winds of the vortex. But in order to get a stratospheric warming event, a sudden stratospheric warming event, these winds have to go below this black line right here. This is 0. When the winds get below here, into this region, that's when they're reversing. That's when your stratospheric polar vortex is actually breaking and is going through a sudden warming event. So while we have a weakening event signaled, the uncertainty here is tremendous as to what is going to happen after that time period. And really, if you look at this black line here, there's only a few members that show the stratospheric polar vortex or the zonal winds reversing, and what would qualify as a stratospheric warming event, sudden stratospheric warming. So I think what I'm trying to say here is that whatever you're hearing about the stratospheric polar vortex weakening and reversing and the sudden warming event, take it with a grain of salt, because there is a tremendous amount of uncertainty here just in 2 weeks' time as to how this is going to behave. And that's going to reflect back on the models and what's going to happen here in the higher latitudes, and it's going to impact our pattern here across North America as a result. So again, we're looking at a colder pattern initially. We do have this flow coming down from the Arctic region. It's going to get cold after the 25th of January, and then we'll watch our ridge axis retreat from here all the way back to the Aleutians, which is going to tend to put a lot of the cold in the western and north central U.S. And allow for some southeast ridging to return by the time we get into the second week of February. And that opens up some questions about our demand profile and just how high our heating demand will get, especially as we get closer to the middle part of February. Where does our cold go? Do we have block in the Atlantic? Can this cold get down here, or does it deflect more to the north and stay up in New England? We will have to wait and see. We're going to have to work through that process of the forecast here in the next couple of days. Thanks for watching, guys. If you have any questions, give us a shout. More of these videos coming your way, and obviously the latest on the European weeklies coming out here in a couple hours. Take care.